Always hogging the worms.
You got the worm yesterday.
I wake up earlier than you.
Oh, brother and sister birds, you should praise your creator and always love him. He gave you feathers for clothes, wings to fly, and all other things that you need.
That humans talking to us?
And he's making great points.
Listen to him.
Hi, I'm Gabby.
And I'm Nick. Welcome to Catholic Central.
If you've ever seen a nativity scene,
Or said, make me an instrument of your peace.
or heard the phrase, preach the gospel at all times, use words if necessary.
Actually, he didn't say that. But St. Francis did write in his Rule 1221, let all the brothers, however, preach by their deeds, which is almost as good.
And he certainly did practice what he preached, or told his friars to preach and practice.
Yeah. Today we're talking about St. Francis, who you might recognize from the thousands of hospitals, shrines, chapels, universities, gardens, books, statues, films, a whole city.
A lot of swag for a dude that owned literally nothing.
St. Francis was born in 1182 to a wealthy cloth merchant and a very comfortable life.
After a relatively carefree life punctuated by a jaunt as a war prisoner, Francis had a vision where God asked him to return to Assisi.
In 1206, he had another vision in the tiny chapel of San Damiano, where Christ spoke to him from the cross and said,
"Rebuild my church."
He became disillusioned with the world and
Gave away all his father's wealth.
overcame his disgust for lepers and started caring for them.
And generally became extremely embarrassing to his father.
Except unlike most of us who rebel by listening to Nickelback in the Kmart parking lot at 2 a.m., St. Francis had a public blowout with his father, worthy of the Real Housewives, where he stripped off his clothes and renounced his inheritance in the town square. Talk about drama!
And from then on, he dressed in a simple wool tunic and married an elusive lady he called Lady Poverty.
Which was not code for a woman he kept in the attic.
No.
It actually means owning nothing and begging for everything.
People started joining him, and in 1209, they went Vatican official.
Pope Innocent III had a dream that the walls of St. John Lateran were collapsing, but one man in a wool tunic was holding them up.
Amazingly, at that exact moment, Francis and his followers were en route to Rome to get a papal blessing for their new order.
Which later became the Franciscans.
From there, St. Francis had an incredible life.
He gained a reputation for peace, even making peace with the Wolf of Gubbio, which was terrorizing a community.
He also started the tradition of the nativity scene, where he recreated the manger scene with a real baby at Greccio.
He participated in interfaith dialogue with Malik al-Kamil, the Ayyubid Sultan of Egypt during the Crusades.
This was huge. At the time, Muslims and Christians were at war with each other, and Francis could have been put to death for even talking about his faith.
Instead, the Sultan was so impressed by Francis and his humble faith that he invited him to stay with him for a week.
It remains a wonderful example of successful interfaith dialogue.
Yeah, no kidding. No one died. In 1224, he received the stigmata, which is when the 5 wounds of Christ appear on your body. It's considered a miraculous, though painful, sign of holiness.
In 1226, he died in a blazing whiteness of light and was named a saint just 2 years later.
St. Francis was one person who was absolutely unafraid to be true to God.
Even if it meant rejecting all social norms.
Even though those social norms were deeply ingrained in him.
When St. Francis first encountered a leper, he was filled with fear and disgust.
He wrote, "When I was in sin, the sight of lepers nauseated me beyond measure. But then God himself led me into their company, and I had pity on them. When I became acquainted with them, what had previously nauseated me became the source of spiritual and physical consolation for me."
St. Francis realized the leper was actually sent by God to teach him. This tells us that not only is rebellion okay sometimes, it's actually encouraged.
Willingness to do things in a radically different way just might be what we all need.
It tells us that anyone can be called to reform the church.
And amazingly, actually succeed.
St. Francis wasn't even a priest, yet we see his legacy in so many places today. That includes the living tradition of the Franciscan friars and the Poor Clares, founded by St. Clare, one of Francis's first followers.
The world of St. Francis might seem far removed.
But some of the issues like corruption in the church, social conflict, the gap between rich and poor, lack of concern for the environment,
A plague.
they're all just practically the same.
St. Francis's life devotion to simplicity and peacemaking.
And seeing God in all living things, even animals, trees, and the sun and the moon,
Are an inspiration for all of us.
St. Francis's simple faith meant that all he cared about was what God thought.
He never hid anything, and he had nothing to hide. And that meant that he had total freedom to be himself.
If you relate to any of these struggles, consider asking St. Francis for help. For Catholic Central, I'm Gabby.
And I'm Nick. Let us know your favorite St. Francis story below.